The bright studio lights of The View blazed down on the familiar set where millions of new Americans tuned in daily for their dose of celebrity gossip and political commentary. Whoopi Goldberg sat comfortably in her usual chair, her distinctive laugh echoing through the studio as she chatted with her co-hosts during the commercial break. Today's show promised to be particularly entertaining. The special segment about viral internet videos that had been making headlines around the world. As the cameras rolled back to life, Whoopi's eyes sparkled with mischief. She had always prided herself on her quick wit and ability to find humor in any situation, no matter how serious others might consider it. This particular segment was right up her alley, a collection of clips showing people in positions of authority being put in their place by everyday citizens or caught in embarrassing moments. "Welcome back to The View," Whoopi announced with her characteristic grin. "Now you know I love a good laugh, and today we're looking at some viral videos that have been cracking people up all over the internet. Some of these clips show people who take themselves way too seriously getting a reality check. The first few videos played without incident, a pompous restaurant manager being called out by customers, a self-important politician stumbling over his words during a speech, and a corporate executive accidentally walking into a glass door. The audience laughed along, and Whoopi provided her usual commentary, making jokes about people who needed to get over themselves. Then came the video that would change everything. The footage showed a scene outside Buckingham Palace in London, where tourists regularly gathered to watch the famous changing of the guard ceremony. The royal guards, dressed in their iconic red tunics and tall black bearskin hats, stood motionless at their posts, rifles at their sides, eyes fixed straight ahead in perfect military discipline. In the video, a group of American tourists could be seen approaching one of the guards. They were clearly on vacation, wearing casual clothes and carrying cameras, chatting loudly as they walked closer to the stoic figure. The guard remained perfectly still, not even blinking, as the tourists began to pose for photos nearby. "Look at this guy," Whoopi chuckled as the video played, "standing there like a statue. I mean, come on, lighten up a little, eh?" She gestured toward the screen where the guard maintained his rigid posture despite the growing crowd of onlookers, the tourists. In the video grew bolder, with one woman stepping closer to the guard and making funny faces while her friend took pictures. Another tourist began waving his hands in front of the guard's face, trying to get a reaction. Through it all, the guard remained absolutely motionless, his eyes staring straight ahead with unwavering focus. "This is hilarious," Whoopi continued, her laughter building. "These guys act like they're protecting Fort Knox or something. It's just a tourist attraction. Smile for the camera, buddy." The studio audience joined in the laughter, finding humor in what they perceived as unnecessary seriousness. The video showed more tourists joining in, with people making increasingly silly gestures and poses around the unmoved guard. Some were taking selfies, others were pretending to march in formation, and a few children were even trying to mimic the guard's serious expression. Throughout it all, the royal guard stood like a monument, completely unaffected by the chaos around him. "Don't get it," Whoopi said, shaking her head with amusement. "What's the big deal? Just acknowledge the people. Give them a little wave or something. You're not actually guarding anything important. You're basically a living decoration for tourists to take pictures with." Her co-hosts chimed in with their own observations, comparing the guards to street performers and questioning why anyone would choose such a job. The laughter in the studio grew louder as they continued to make jokes about the overly serious nature of the royal guards and their ridiculous commitment to standing still. But as the video continued, something unexpected happened. A young child in the crowd, no more than 6 or 7 years old, broke away from his parents and ran directly up to the guard. Instead of making faces or trying to get attention like the other tourists, the little boy simply stood in front of the guard and saluted with perfect form, his small hand pressed firmly to his forehead. For just a moment something flickered. In the guard's eyes, it was barely noticeable, a slight softening of his expression, a brief acknowledgement of the child's respectful gesture. The boy held his salute for several seconds before stepping back and returning to his parents, who smiled proudly at their son's display of respect. Whoopi paused her commentary for a moment, but then quickly returned to her jokes. "Well, at least the kid knows how to show some respect." Unlike his statue friend there, she said, though her laughter seemed slightly less enthusiastic than before. The video was winding down, showing the tourists gradually dispersing as the ceremony came to an end. The guard remained at his post, maintaining the same perfect posture he had held throughout the entire ordeal. As the camera panned away, capturing the majestic backdrop of Buckingham Palace, Whoopi prepared to move on to the next segment. "Okay, that was good for a laugh," she said, shuffling her papers. "I still don't understand why these guys can't just relax a little bit. I mean, we get it, you're very important and serious. But come on, show some personality." What Whoopi and her audience didn't know was that across the ocean in London, someone had been watching the show. Someone who understood exactly what those guards represented and why their discipline meant so much more than entertainment for tourists. Someone who was about to provide a response that would change how everyone viewed not just the royal guards, but the very nature of duty, sacrifice, respect. The stage was set for a confrontation that would go far beyond television comedy, touching on themes of honor, service, and the true meaning of standing guard over something greater than oneself. What started as a simple joke was about to become a powerful lesson in understanding the difference between entertainment and genuine respect for those who serve. 3 days after Whoopi's segment aired, the clip had already gone viral across social media platforms. Millions of people had watched the talk show host laugh at the Royal Guard's discipline, with comments ranging from agreement with her perspective to sharp criticism of her attitude. The video was shared, liked, and debated across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, creating a digital storm that neither Whoopi nor her producers had anticipated in London. Sergeant Major James Richardson was finishing his morning routine when his phone buzzed with a text from his daughter Sarah, who was studying abroad in New York. "Dad, you need to see this," the message read, followed by a link to the viral clip. James had served 23 years with the Coldstream Guards, one of the oldest regiments in the British Army, and had spent countless hours standing guard at royal residences. As he watched the video, James felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling got whenever he encountered people who fundamentally misunderstood what the royal guards represented. He had heard the jokes before, seen the tourists treating his fellow soldiers like living statues, but this was different. This was a prominent television personality with a massive platform reducing the sacred duty of his brothers-in-arms to nothing more than entertainment. James thought about his own time standing guard. He remembered the scorching summer days when sweat poured down his face inside the heavy bearskin hat, the bitter winter mornings when the cold seemed to penetrate his bones, and the countless hours of maintaining perfect posture while tourists snapped photos and made jokes. But he also remembered why he did it, why every guard who had ever stood at those posts had done it. The royal guards weren't just ceremonial figures or tourist attractions. They were active soldiers who had served in combat zones around the world. Many had fought in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other dangerous locations, risking their lives for their country. The discipline they displayed while on guard duty was the same discipline that had kept them and their fellow soldiers alive in war zones. It was a discipline born from respect, honor, and an understanding that some things were bigger than individual comfort or entertainment. That afternoon, James made a decision that would change everything. He contacted his former commanding officer and explained what he wanted to do. Within hours, he had secured permission to appear on American television as a representative of the Royal Guards. His goal wasn't to attack Whoopi personally, but to provide context and education about what the Guards really represented. The logistics moved quickly. James's military record was impeccable, decorated veteran, exemplary service record, and a natural ability to communicate complex ideas in simple terms. The producers of several American talk shows reached out, eager to capitalize on the growing controversy. After careful consideration, James chose to appear on a popular morning news program that would give him the platform he needed to reach the same audience that had watched Whoopi's original segment. Meanwhile, back in New York, Whoopi was beginning to realize that her jokes had struck a deeper nerve than she had intended. Her social media mentions were flooded with comments from veterans, active military personnel, and British citizens who felt that her commentary had crossed a line from harmless humor into disrespectful mockery. Many of the responses were angry, but others were deeply hurt, sharing personal stories about family members who had served as royal guards or explaining the historical significance of the tradition. One comment in particular caught her attention. It was from a woman named Margaret, whose son had been killed in action in Afghanistan while serving with the same regiment that provided royal guards. "My boy stood guard at the palace before his deployment," Margaret had written. "He was so proud of that duty, so honored to represent his country. When I see that guard standing there, I see my son's dedication and sacrifice. It's not entertainment, it's honor." Whoopi felt a pang of regret as she read message after message from people who had been personally affected by her words. Had always prided herself on being someone who stood up for the underdog, called out injustice, and fought for respect and dignity. But in this case, she was beginning to realize that she might have been the one showing disrespect. Her assistant knocked on her dressing room door. "There's a call from London," she said. "Someone wants to respond to your segment. Say he's a former royal guard who wants to come on the show." Whoopi hesitated. Part of her wanted to let the controversy die down naturally, to move on to other topics and hope that people would forget about the whole thing, but another part of her, the part that had always been curious about other perspectives and willing to engage in difficult conversations, was intrigued by the possibility of hearing directly from someone who had actually served as a royal guard. "What's his story?" she asked. "His name is James Richardson. 23 years of service, multiple combat deployments, decorated veteran. He specifically requested to appear on our show to provide what he called proper context about the Royal Guards." Whoopi nodded slowly. She knew that this could go either way. It could be an opportunity for genuine dialogue and education, or it could turn into a confrontational disaster that would only make things worse. But she also knew that running away from difficult conversations had never been her style. "Set it up," she said. "But make sure he understands that this is going to be a respectful conversation. I'm not looking to ambush anyone, and I don't want to be ambushed either." Over the next 2 days, as preparations were made for James's appearance, the anticipation continued to build. Social media was buzzing with predictions about what would happen when the veteran faced off with the talk show host. Some expected fireworks and heated arguments. Others hoped for a moment of genuine understanding and education. James spent his time preparing not for battle, but for teaching. He gathered photos, stories, and historical information that would help explain the true nature of the Royal Guards. Service, he wasn't interested in humiliating Whoopi or scoring points in some kind of public relations victory. His goal was much simpler and more profound. He wanted to help people understand that behind the uniform and the ceremony was a tradition of service, sacrifice, and honor that deserved respect, not ridicule. The stage was set for a meeting that would either bridge a gap of understanding or widen the divide between entertainment culture and military tradition. What neither participant knew was that their conversation would become a defining moment in how Americans viewed both military service and the responsibility that comes with having a public platform. The morning of James Richardson's appearance on The View arrived with unseasonable warmth for October in New York City. James had flown in the night before, staying at a modest hotel near the ABC studios. He hadn't slept well, not from nervousness, but from the weight of responsibility he felt to represent his fellow guards with dignity and clarity as he dressed in his civilian clothes. A simple dark suit with his service medals pinned to the lapel, James reflected on the hundreds of letters and messages he had received from current and former military personnel around the world. They weren't asking him to attack Whoopi or to create drama. They were asking him to help people understand something that seemed to be getting lost in the modern world: the difference between entertainment and genuine service. At the studio, Whoopi was also preparing for what she knew would be one of the most important conversations of her career. She had spent the previous evening reading about the history of the Royal Guards, learning about their combat service and the traditions that stretched back centuries. The more she learned, the more she realized how little she had understood. When she made those jokes just a week ago, her makeup artist noticed her unusual quietness. "You okay, Whoopi? You seem different today? Just thinking?" Whoopi replied, looking at herself in the mirror. Sometimes you realize you might not have had all the information before opening your mouth. When James arrived at the studio, he was greeted not with the adversarial atmosphere he had expected, but with genuine curiosity from the production staff. Several crew members approached him quietly to thank him for his service, and one young camera operator mentioned that his brother was currently deployed overseas. As the show began, Whoopi introduced the segment with uncharacteristic seriousness. Last week, we showed a video of Royal Guards in London, and I made some comments that I'm learning might have been based on incomplete understanding. Today we have Sergeant Major James Richardson, a decorated veteran who served as a Royal Guard for many years, joining us via satellite from our London studio. The camera switched to James, who appeared calm and composed, sitting straight in his chair with his hands folded. There was no anger in his expression, no defensive posture. Instead, he radiated the same quiet dignity that the guards in the original video had shown. Sergeant Major Richardson, Whoopi began, I want to start by saying that after hearing from many people this past week, I realize I may have spoken without fully understanding what the Royal Guards represent. Can you help me and our audience understand what it really means to stand guard? James nodded slightly. Ms. Goldberg, thank you for having me on your program. I think it's important for people to understand that when you see a Royal Guard standing at his post, you're not looking at someone playing dress-up or putting on a show for tourists. You're looking at a soldier who has likely served his country in combat, who has seen things and done things that most people will never have to experience. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The discipline you see, that perfect stillness, that focus, that's not stubbornness or arrogance. That's the same discipline that keeps soldiers alive in war zones. It's the same focus that allows a man to stand between his fellow soldiers and danger without flinching. Whoopi leaned forward, genuinely interested. But why is it so important to maintain that level of discipline during what is essentially a ceremonial duty? Because it's not just ceremonial, James replied. Okay, those guards are active soldiers. They're protecting one of the most important buildings in our country, and they're representing something much bigger than themselves. When a guard stands at his post without moving for hours, even when people are making jokes or trying to distract him, he's demonstrating that some things are more important than personal comfort or popularity. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. This is Private Tommy Jenkins. He stood guard at Buckingham Palace for 2 years before he was deployed to Afghanistan. He was killed by an improvised explosive device while trying to save a wounded Afghan child. He held the photo steady, looking directly into the camera. When Tommy stood guard, he wasn't just standing there for show. He was preparing himself mentally and physically for the moments when lives would depend on his ability to stay focused under pressure. The studio fell completely silent. Whoopi felt a lump forming in her throat as she looked at the young man's face in the photograph. James continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Every guard who stands at those posts carries with him the memory of brothers who didn't come home. The discipline isn't for the tourists, it's for the fallen. For the mission, for the oath we took to serve something greater than ourselves. I had no idea, Whoopi said quietly. When I watched that video, I saw what I thought was unnecessary seriousness. I didn't see the depth of commitment and sacrifice behind it. Most people don't, James replied without accusation. And that's understandable. If you've never served in the military, if you've never had to depend on the discipline and reliability of the person standing next to you in a life or death situation, it might look like just pageantry. He leaned forward slightly. People to understand that when tourists laugh at a guard or try to make him break his focus, they're not just having harmless fun. They're asking someone to abandon the very qualities that might one day save lives. His own life, or the life of someone else's son or daughter. Whoopi nodded, feeling the weight of understanding settling on her shoulders. Sergeant Major, I owe you and every guard an apology. I spoke without thinking, without understanding what I was really looking at. Ms. Goldberg, James said gently, I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because I believe you're someone who cares about treating people with respect and dignity. I've watched your show, and I know you stand up for people who are misunderstood or unfairly treated. That's exactly what I'm asking you to do now, to help people see these guards not as entertainment, but as human beings who have dedicated their lives to service. The conversation was taking a turn that neither participant had fully expected. What had started as a potential confrontation was becoming a moment of genuine learning and connection. But there was more to come, stories that would reveal the true cost of service and the real meaning behind the discipline that tourists saw as merely stubborn stillness. As the conversation continued, James could see that Whoopi was genuinely moved by what she was learning. The studio audience, too, had fallen into a respectful silence that was rare for daytime television. James decided to share something more personal, something that would help everyone understand the human cost of the discipline they had witnessed in that viral video. "Ms. Goldberg, may I tell you about a day that changed how I view my service?" James asked. Whoopi nodded, sensing that something important was coming. "It was July 15th, 2009. I was standing guard at Buckingham Palace on what started as a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning. The tourists were there, as always, taking pictures and making the usual jokes. I maintained my position, focused straight ahead, just as I had been trained to do." James paused, the memory clearly still vivid in his mind. Around midday, I noticed a woman approaching. She was different from the typical tourists, older, well-dressed, but there was something in her posture. Something about the way she walked that caught my attention without me moving my eyes. The studio remained completely quiet as James continued his story. She stood in front of me for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few minutes. Then she began to speak, very quietly, so only I could hear. She said, "My grandson was in the Royal Marines. He died in Helmand Province 3 months ago. He always said he hoped to serve as a guard someday, to have the honor of protecting the crown." James's voice caught slightly, but he maintained his composure. She told me that seeing me standing there, maintaining that discipline and honor, helped her feel connected to her grandson's service. She said it made his sacrifice feel meaningful, knowing that there were still people who understood the importance of duty and commitment. Whoopi's eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "Did you do?" I couldn't speak to her, of course. I couldn't break my position or acknowledge her words in any obvious way. But I did something that I had never done before in all my years of service. James smiled slightly. When she finished speaking and began to walk away, I allowed a single tear to roll down my cheek. It was the only way I could honor her grandson's memory and acknowledge her pain while still maintaining my duty. The camera captured the emotion on faces throughout the studio. Even the hardened production crew members were visibly moved by James's story. "That woman taught me something crucial," James continued. "She helped me understand that our discipline, our commitment to standing firm no matter what happens around us, isn't just about military protocol. It's about representing something that families like hers can hold on to when they're grieving. Something that honors the sacrifice of those who can't stand guard anymore." Whoopi wiped her eyes with a tissue. "I'm beginning to understand that what I saw as stubbornness was actually a form of tribute." "Exactly," James said. "Every guard who stands at those posts is standing for every soldier who can't stand anymore. We're standing for the families who have lost loved ones in service to their country. We're standing for the principle that some things, duty, honor, commitment, are worth maintaining even when it's difficult or uncomfortable." James reached for another photograph. "This is my unit from Afghanistan. 8 men in this picture. Didn't make it home. When I stood guard after returning from deployment, I wasn't just representing the crown or the army. I was representing these men, their families, their sacrifice." He held up the photo so the camera could capture the faces of the young soldiers. "Every tourist who tried to make me smile or break my concentration was unknowingly asking me to abandon my vigil for these men. They didn't mean any harm, but they didn't understand what they were really asking." Whoopi shook her head slowly. "James, may I call you James? I feel like I owe an apology, not just to you, but to every family member of a service person who might have watched my show last week." "James is fine," he replied with warmth. "And you don't owe anyone an apology for not knowing something. You had no way of knowing. What matters is what you do with the knowledge now." One of Whoopi's co-hosts, who had been silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. "James, how do you feel about the fact that millions of people saw that video and laughed, not understanding what they were really seeing?" James considered the question carefully. I don't blame people for laughing at something they don't understand. Humor is often how we react to things that seem strange or unfamiliar. But I do hope that this conversation helps people think a little differently the next time they see a soldier or a police officer or anyone else who has taken an oath to serve others. He leaned back slightly, his posture still perfect, even in civilian clothes. The guard in that video, and I know him personally, by the way, his name's Corporal David Walsh. He wasn't standing there to be entertainment. He was standing there because he had made a promise to his country, to his fellow soldiers, to himself that he would perform his duty with honor regardless of what happened around him. Has Corporal Walsh seen the video? Whoopi asked. He has. He has. And he's received hundreds of messages of support from people around the world who were touched by his dedication. But he's also received messages from families thanking him for representing their loved ones who served. That, I think, means more to him than any praise for his military bearing. James looked directly into the camera. I want people to understand that when you see someone in uniform performing their duty with that kind of discipline and commitment, you're not just looking at an individual. You're looking at someone who carries the hopes and dreams of everyone who has ever worn that uniform. Everyone who has ever made the sacrifice to serve others before themselves. The interview was nearing its scheduled end, but both Whoopi and James could sense that something important was happening, not just for them, but for everyone watching. This wasn't just about royal guards or military protocol anymore. It was about respect, understanding, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to understand the deeper meaning of service and sacrifice. What neither of them knew was that Corporal Walsh himself was watching from his barracks in London, along with dozens of his fellow guards. The response from the military community was about to add another powerful dimension to a conversation that had already exceeded everyone's expectations. As the interview continued, Whoopi made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of wrapping up the segment as scheduled, she turned to her producers and made a gesture indicating she wanted to extend the conversation. Was television gold, not because of conflict or controversy, but because of the genuine human connection that was unfolding in real time? James, before we finish, I want to ask you something personal, Whoopi said. You've spent 23 years serving your country. You've been in combat, you've stood guard, you've seen colleagues die. What drives someone to make that kind of commitment? James was quiet for a moment, and viewers could see him considering how to answer such a profound question in a way that would be meaningful to people who had never served. When I was 18 years old, he began, I was directionless. I had no real goals, no sense of purpose. My father had served, my grandfather had served. But I joined the army not because of family tradition, but because I was looking for something bigger than myself to be part of. He shifted slightly in his chair, maintaining eye contact with the camera. What I discovered was that service, real service, changes you. Not just the training or the discipline, though. Those are important. It's the realization that you're part of something that existed before you and will exist after you're gone. Every guard who has ever stood at those posts is connected to every other guard throughout history. Whoopi nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in her expression. When tourists see you standing there, they're seeing the current representative of that continuous tradition. Exactly. And that tradition has been maintained through 2 world wars, through the troubles in Northern Ireland, through conflicts in the Falklands, Iraq, Afghanistan. Guards have stood at those posts during air raids, during terrorist attacks, during national celebrations and national tragedies. The commitment remains constant. James pulled out his phone and showed it to the camera. While we've been talking, I've been receiving messages from current and former guards around the world. Would you like me to share a few?
Please.
Whoopi said immediately. This one is from Corporal Michelle Torres, currently serving with the Grenadier Guards. She says, "Thank you for helping people understand that our discipline isn't about being unfriendly or superior. It's about honoring everyone who wore this uniform before us, and everyone who will wear it after we're gone." James scrolled to another message. This is from the family of Lance Corporal Kevin Murphy, who was killed in action in Iraq in 2007. They write, "Every time we see a guard standing at his post, we think of Kevin and know that his commitment to duty is being continued by others. Thank you for explaining what that means. The emotion in the studio was palpable. Whoopi had to take a moment to compose herself before speaking. James, I want to do something. I want to apologize not just to you, but to everyone watching, who serves or has served, to the families of service members, and to anyone who felt hurt by my comments last week. She turned directly to the camera. I made jokes about something I didn't understand, and in doing so, I disrespected people who have dedicated their lives to serving others. That wasn't my intention, but intention doesn't erase impact. Wrong, and I'm sorry. James nodded appreciatively. Miss Goldberg, your willingness to learn and to admit when you might have been mistaken shows exactly the kind of character that I try to embody as a soldier. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we respond when we realize we've made them. Whoopi smiled through her tears. You're being far more gracious than I deserve. No, James replied firmly. You're showing exactly the kind of openness and humility that makes meaningful conversation possible. This is how understanding happens, not through attacks or defensiveness, but through honest dialogue between people who are willing to listen to each other. At that moment, one of the show's producers rushed onto the set and whispered something to Whoopi. Her eyes widened with surprise and excitement. James, we've just received word that Corporal David Walsh, the guard from the original video, is standing by in London and would like to join our conversation. Would you be comfortable with that? James's face lit up with genuine joy. David is one of the finest soldiers I've ever known. I would be honored to have him join us. The screen split to show a third feed from London, where Corporal Walsh appeared, in his dress uniform. Unlike James, who was in civilian clothes, Walsh was in full military regalia, a powerful visual reminder of the active duty status of Royal Guards. Corporal Walsh, Whoopi said, clearly emotional, I owe you a personal apology. I made fun of your dedication and professionalism, and I did so without understanding what you represent or what you've sacrificed. Walsh, maintaining perfect military posture, even while seated, spoke with the same measured dignity that James had shown. Ms. Goldberg, there's no need for apologies. I understand that my behavior might seem strange to people who haven't served. I want everyone to know that when I stand guard, I'm not thinking about the tourists or the cameras. I'm thinking about my mates who didn't make it home from Afghanistan. I'm thinking about the oath I took to serve my queen and country. I'm thinking about the little girl who saluted me last month. Her father is deployed overseas, and she told me that. Seeing me at my post makes her feel like someone is watching over her daddy, too. The camera captured the profound silence that followed Walsh's words. In that moment, millions of viewers around the world were beginning to see Royal Guards, and perhaps all service members, in an entirely new light. Corporal Walsh, James, interjected, tell them about the letters. Walsh smiled slightly, the first break in his formal demeanor. Since the video went viral, I've received hundreds of letters from families of service members around the world. Many of them are from people who have lost loved ones in military service. They tell me that seeing someone maintain that level of commitment and discipline helps them feel that their family member's sacrifice still matters, that the values they died for are still being upheld. He reached for a letter on the table beside him. This one is from a Gold Star mother in Texas whose son was killed in Iraq. She writes, when I see you standing guard, I see my son's dedication and honor living on. Thank you for continuing to serve with the same commitment he showed. The impact of these words on everyone in both studios was visible and profound. What had started as a simple celebrity interview was becoming something much more significant, a moment of national and international reflection on service, sacrifice, and respect. As the extended interview drew toward its conclusion, something extraordinary was happening across social media and in living rooms around the world. The hashtag #RespectTheGuard was trending globally, with millions of people sharing stories about military service members and their own families and communities. The conversation had evolved far beyond its original scope. It's becoming a moment of genuine connection between civilians and military personnel. Whoopi looked at both soldiers on the split screen and made a decision that would define her legacy in a way she never expected. James, David, I want to make a commitment to both of you and to everyone watching. I want to visit London and personally thank the guards who are currently serving, not as a celebrity making a publicity stunt, but as a person who learned something important today and wants to pay proper respect." James and David exchanged glances, clearly moved by the sincerity of her offer. "Ms. Goldberg," James said, "that would be an honor. But more importantly, it would mean the world to the young soldiers who are currently serving. Many of them joined the service inspired by the same sense of duty we've been discussing today. And having someone of your stature acknowledge their commitment would be incredibly meaningful." David nodded in agreement. "Added what?" "Realizes that behind every guard standing at his post is a young person who made a conscious choice to serve something greater than himself. Some joined straight from school, others after university. Some come from military families, others are the first in their family to serve. But they all share that common commitment to duty and honor." Whoopi wiped her eyes once more, clearly emotional. "I want to ask both of you something. How do we help other people understand what you've taught me today? How do we bridge this gap between civilian life and military service so that fewer people make the same mistake I made?" James leaned forward thoughtfully. "Education is part of it, certainly. But I think the most important thing is encouraging people to look beyond the surface of what they see. When someone encounters a person in uniform, whether it's a Royal Guard, a police officer, a firefighter, or any other service member, instead of seeing just the uniform or the job, try to see the human being who chose to dedicate their life to serving others." David added, "And remember that behind every person in uniform is a family. We have parents who worry about us, spouses who miss us during deployments, children who are proud of what we do. We're not different from anyone else, except in our choice. To serve, we laugh, we cry, we have hopes and fears just like everyone else. But we've also made a commitment that sometimes requires us to put those personal feelings aside for the greater good." The producer signaled that they had just a few more minutes. But Whoopi wasn't ready to end this conversation. She had learned more in the past hour than she had in months of regular programming. And she could see from the viewer responses flooding in that the audience felt the same way. Before we finish, Whoopi said, "I want to share some of the messages we've been receiving from viewers." She picked up a tablet and began reading. "This is from Maria in California. My son is deployed in Syria right now. Seeing this conversation gives me hope that people will understand the sacrifice our military families make every day." This one is from Robert in Ohio. "I'm a Vietnam veteran. I've never felt like people really understood what service means. Thank you for having this conversation." She continued reading, her voice growing stronger with each message. From Jennifer in Texas. "I'm a teacher, and I'm going to use this interview to help my students understand the difference between entertainment and respect." From Michael in London. "I walk past the guards at Buckingham Palace every day on my way to work. I've never really thought about what they represent. Tomorrow I'll see them differently." The impact of the conversation was becoming clear and real. Time. Social media metrics showed that the interview was being shared at unprecedented rates. The comments overwhelmingly positive and thoughtful rather than divisive or argumentative. James spoke directly to the camera for his final words. "To everyone watching, whether you're in America, Britain, or anywhere else in the world, I want you to know that service members everywhere are just ordinary people who have chosen to do extraordinary things. We don't ask for special treatment or excessive praise. We just ask for the same respect and understanding that any person deserves for dedicating their life to helping others." David concluded with equal grace. "When you see a guard standing at his post or a soldier in uniform or anyone else in service, remember that you're looking at someone who has volunteered to stand between you and danger, between order and chaos, between safety and threat. That's not something to mock or take lightly, something to honor." Whoopi took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera. "A week ago, I laughed at something I didn't understand. Today, I learned that behind what I saw as stubbornness was actually strength, dedication, and honor. I learned that sometimes the most important things are the ones we can't see on the surface." She turned back to both soldiers. "James, David, thank you for your service, not just to your country, but to all of us today. You've taught me that real strength sometimes looks like standing perfectly still, that true courage sometimes means staying silent, and that the highest form of respect is maintaining your principles even when others don't understand them. As the interview concluded and the camera stopped rolling, something remarkable had happened. A simple viral video that began as entertainment had become a moment of genuine education and connection. The laughter that started the controversy had been replaced by understanding, respect, and a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices made by those who serve. In the days and weeks that followed, the interview would be viewed millions of times around the world. Military recruitment offices reported increased interest from young people inspired by the conversation. Veterans organizations praised the authentic dialogue between civilian and military perspectives. Most importantly, tourists visiting guard posts at Buckingham Palace and other locations began approaching with newfound respect and understanding. Whoopi kept her promise to visit London, where she was greeted not with fanfare, but with quiet dignity by the guards she had once mocked. The photo of her standing respectfully beside a royal guard, both of them serious and dignified, became an iconic image of reconciliation and mutual respect. The viral video that had started as a joke became something far more powerful, a reminder that behind every uniform is a human being deserving of respect, and that sometimes the most important conversations happen when we're brave enough to admit we might have been wrong.